I want people to go there and see stuff that they don't normally see. But I did that whole series, American Craftsman, in 2011.
Here's something that doesn't add up. Jesse James, a man who turned a repair shop in his mother's garage into a multi-million-dollar empire, who had 2 million people tuning in for the very first episode of one of his shows, somehow produced a series so forgotten that it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Just 3 episodes, a handful of reviews, and silence. The show was called Jesse James Presents Austin Speed Shop, and if you've never heard of it, that's actually the point. Because the real story of why it ended says a lot more about Jesse James than the show itself ever did. The man who built everything, then quietly walked away. Most people know Jesse James from Monster Garage, the Discovery Channel show where teams of mechanics had 7 days to turn ordinary vehicles into wild, barely legal machines. It ran from 2002 to 2006, pulled in massive ratings, and made Jesse James one of the most recognizable names in automotive television. But what a lot of people don't talk about is what happened in the years right after that show ended. Monster Garage didn't just end on a high note and let Jesse ride off into the sunset. There was friction building behind the scenes long before the final episode aired. Jesse had become increasingly uncomfortable with the direction television wanted to take him. More drama, more staged conflict, less actual metal work. He'd built his reputation as a craftsman, not a character on a reality show. And those two things were quietly pulling in opposite directions. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling in very public ways. His Long Beach shop, West Coast Choppers, had grown into an operation with over 200 staff. He was managing people, not building things. The California Air Resources Board came after him in 2007 over more than 50 motorcycles his shop had sold between 1997 and 2006 that didn't comply with emissions regulations. The fine eventually settled at over $270,000. His marriage to actress Sandra Bullock collapsed in 2010 following a cheating scandal that played out across every tabloid in the country. And then, that same year, a photo surfaced of him wearing a Nazi-era cap and raising his arm in a salute. West Coast Choppers' logo had already been banned by a school district in 2004 for its resemblance to white power imagery. The combination of all of it became too much. He shut down the Long Beach shop in 2010 and left California entirely. So when Jesse James showed up in Austin, Texas, with a partial ownership stake in a custom car shop called Austin Speed Shop, it wasn't a career move. It was a reset. He wanted to get back to the thing that had actually made him good at any of this, using his hands, working with metal, teaching other people how to do it right. What nobody expected was that this quieter, more personal version of Jesse James would also produce one of the strangest footnotes in his entire television career. Before Austin, how Jesse James learned to build an empire out of nothing. To understand why Austin Speed Shop mattered to Jesse James, you have to understand where he came from. Because his origin story is not the kind that usually ends with a television career and a net worth estimated at $50 million. Jesse Gregory James was born in Long Beach, California in 1969. He grew up around his father's antique business, but didn't have much of a stable home life. His parents divorced, and he largely fended for himself. He played as an outside linebacker at Riverside City College, and for a moment, it looked like football might be his path forward. 2 injuries ended that. He had no college degree, no obvious plan, and no money. At 19, he started working as a bouncer. From there, he became a bodyguard, working security for some of the biggest names in heavy metal: Slayer, Glenn Danzig, Soundgarden. It paid the bills, but it wasn't where he wanted to be. What he actually wanted to do was build things. Specifically, motorcycles. In 1992, he opened West Coast Choppers out of his mother's garage in Long Beach. He wasn't working with a business plan or investor funding. He was welding in his garage at night, charging what he could, building a reputation one custom bike at a time. And it worked. Within years, the shop had moved to a larger facility, and Jesse was building $150,000 custom bikes for celebrities and athletes. Shaquille O'Neal, Diamond Dallas Page, a long roster of others. But the skill that really set him apart, the one that would eventually come back as the centerpiece of Austin Speed Shop, was metal fabrication. Specifically, fenders. At a time when most shops were outsourcing that kind of work, Jesse was doing it himself, and doing it better than almost anyone else in the country. That ability to shape raw metal into something functional and beautiful was what built his reputation long before any camera crew ever showed up. The Discovery Channel found him through that work. In 2000, they made a documentary called Motorcycle Mania that followed his daily life at West Coast Choppers. Audiences responded immediately. 2 years later, he was hosting Monster Garage. Just 8 years after starting in his mother's garage, Jesse James was on national television with millions of viewers. The speed of it was remarkable. But speed, it turns out, also comes with consequences. The How-To series, Nobody Asked For, and How It Came to Exist. After leaving California in 2010, Jesse James bought into Austin Speed Shop, a custom car and fabrication shop in Austin, Texas, that honored what he described as old-world craftsmanship. It was exactly the kind of place he'd been trying to get back to. No massive staff, no corporate overhead, just skilled hands working on metal the way it used to be done. Around this time, he was also running his own production company, Pay Up Sucker Productions, which he'd established after Monster Garage ended. The company had already produced a handful of shows. History of the Chopper had done reasonably well, but other projects had landed with much less impact. Jesse wasn't deterred. He had an idea for a how-to series, something educational, something that would show viewers the actual craft behind what he did. The first installment of that series was Jesse James Presents Austin Speed Shop. The show was released in 2011 through El Jefe Entertainment LLC and distributed on home video and digital platforms like Amazon and Apple TV. It was never picked up by a cable network. There was no broadcast deal, no promotional machine behind it. Jesse produced it himself through his own company, on his own terms. It had 3 episodes, each roughly an hour long, and each one focused on a specific fabrication technique. The first episode, simply titled Headers, introduced viewers to the Austin Speed Shop and its team. Jesse took 2 of the shop's builders and walked them through the process of making custom headers for a 1932 Ford Roadster, a one-of-a-kind, hours-intensive job that required real precision. The second episode, Fenders, was probably the most personal of the 3. Making fenders was the exact skill that had launched his career in the first place, and the episode had the feel of someone passing something important on. The third volume, Jesse called them volumes, not episodes, covered bomber-style seats, how to shape them, how to rivet them, how to do it the mid-century way. No drama, no staged conflict, no countdown clocks, just a craftsman, a shop, and a camera. That was the entire vision. And that vision, as it turned out, was also the problem. Why the show failed. The uncomfortable truth. Here's where it gets interesting. Because the failure of Jesse James Presents Austin Speed Shop wasn't caused by any single dramatic event. There was no blow-up, no behind-the-scenes fallout, no network pulling the plug in a contentious meeting. The show failed quietly, which in some ways is harder to explain and harder to recover from. The first issue was distribution. The show never aired on cable television, not once. In an era when car shows lived and died by their network exposure, when Gas Monkey Garage and Fast and Loud were pulling massive numbers on Discovery, when American Chopper was still a cultural touchstone, Jesse James Presents Austin Speed Shop was released straight to home video and digital rental. Most people who might have watched it never even knew it existed. The audience for this kind of content wasn't browsing Amazon for self-produced how-to fabrication series. They were watching whatever appeared on their cable guide on a Tuesday night. The second issue was the format itself. Jesse's instinct, cut out the drama, focus entirely on the craft, was admirable. But television audiences in 2011 weren't necessarily looking for an hour-long tutorial on how to make custom headers. The viewers who had loved Monster Garage loved the chaos of it, the ticking clock, the team dynamics, the occasional spectacular failure. Austin Speed Shop had none of that. The people who would have genuinely appreciated the technical depth were probably not the same people who had made Monster Garage a hit. There's a reason networks spend millions on audience research. Format matters as much as content, sometimes more. Jesse skipped that entire conversation. There's also the matter of timing and context. By 2011, Jesse James was coming off one of the worst years of his public life. The tabloid coverage of his divorce from Sandra Bullock, the affairs, the Nazi photo, all of it had done real damage to his public image. He was no longer the cool, outlaw craftsman who built bikes for celebrities. For a significant portion of the general public, he'd become a punchline. Launching a new show into that environment, without the backing of a major network, without any real marketing push, was always going to be an uphill battle. The ratings reflected all of it. The show scored a 5 out of 10 on IMDb, based on a tiny number of reviews. It was pulled from whatever limited distribution it had and largely disappeared. Jesse never spoke about it publicly, and at some point it was quietly removed from his Wikipedia page entirely. For a man whose television career had included record-breaking premieres and multi-season runs on major networks, this was as close to invisible as a project could get. And the silence he maintained around it afterward said more than any interview could have. Some failures you talk about, others you just bury. The Outlaw Garage, Chapter 5, and what finally confirmed it was over. If Austin Speed Shop was a quiet exit, what came next made it official. In 2012, Jesse James came back to Discovery Channel with a show called Jesse James, Outlaw Garage. This was a full network production, properly funded, properly promoted. Everything Austin Speed Shop hadn't been. The premise was similar. Jesse was now a part owner of Austin Speed Shop, building custom hot rods from 1940s to 1960s era vehicles, working with a crew, getting back to his roots. Discovery clearly saw potential in it. Jesse reportedly hoped it would grow into a 20-episode series. It ran for 5 episodes. The show had real problems almost immediately. Viewers who came back hoping for the Monster Garage-era Jesse James found something that felt formulaic, the kind of reality TV structure he'd always claimed to hate. Deadline pressure, interpersonal drama, macho posturing. The same viewers who'd appreciated the craft side of his work found the drama exhausting. And viewers who wanted drama found better options elsewhere on the same network. Gas Monkey Garage was already dominating that lane on Discovery. Counting Cars had carved out its own audience. Outlaw Garage landed in a crowded space without a clear identity, and audiences had no real reason to choose it over what was already working. Discovery canceled it after that single short season, citing poor ratings. Jesse responded by publishing a scathing blog post, since deleted, in which he called Discovery's productions fake, staged, and scripted, and declared he was done with the network. A source inside Discovery told Radar Online that the cancellation was purely a ratings decision and had nothing to do with anything personal. The public back and forth didn't help either of them. Then, in 2013, Jesse left Austin's Speed Shop entirely. According to his Wikipedia page, he departed to focus on reopening West Coast choppers in Austin. That exit effectively closed the door on the Austin Speed Shop chapter of his television career for good. What's worth noting is how the end of Outlaw Garage mirrored the end of the self-produced series. Different circumstances, different budgets, different networks involved, but the same outcome. Audiences didn't follow. And when audiences don't follow, the machinery stops, regardless of how skilled the person running it actually is. Jesse had now lost the same fight twice, in two different formats, in the span of roughly 2 years. Around the end of 2012, Jesse had gotten engaged to professional drag racer Alexis DeJoria. They married in March of 2013, the same year he walked away from Austin Speed Shop. Whether that personal stability gave him permission to finally step back from something that clearly wasn't working is hard to say, but the timing is hard to ignore. What actually happened, and what Jesse James became after all of it. So why did Austin Speed Shop really end? The honest answer is that it was the product of several overlapping problems that no single decision could have solved. Jesse James built the show the way he builds motorcycles, on his own terms, without compromise, without asking anyone else what they thought the market wanted. That approach had worked when he had the full weight of a major network behind him, and when his public reputation was at its peak. In 2011, cut off from both of those things, it didn't have enough oxygen to survive. The self-produced format meant no promotional infrastructure. The no-drama approach meant no built-in hook for casual viewers. The damaged public image meant a smaller audience was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And the how-to format, as genuinely skilled as the craftsmanship in it was, simply didn't translate to mass viewership without something to make non-specialists care. What the show did reveal was something real and consistent about how Jesse James operates. His Celebrity Apprentice appearance in 2009, where he was eliminated in the second-to-last episode after refusing to ask his then-wife Sandra Bullock for help fundraising, despite the fact that she could have easily provided it, tells you something about the man. He placed third. He could have won. He chose not to ask. That stubbornness, that refusal to bend to what the situation required, shows up again and again across his career. It's the same quality that made him a world-class fabricator and a consistently difficult television personality at the same time. At some point, those two things can't coexist in the same project without one of them losing. His production company, Pay Up Sucker Productions, had already shown signs of this pattern. History of the Chopper had done reasonably well, but Iraq Confidential with Jesse James and Green Scream both failed to find audiences. Austin Speed Shop continued that trend. The through line across all of those projects was Jesse's insistence on controlling the creative direction, which is entirely understandable for someone who built everything he had through that same instinct, but which also consistently produced work that felt disconnected from what audiences actually wanted to watch. After leaving Austin Speed Shop and ending his involvement with Outlaw Garage, Jesse moved his energy into Jesse James Firearms Unlimited in Austin, Texas, applying the same precision metalwork to gun manufacturing that he'd spent decades using on motorcycles and cars. In November of 2013, the company unveiled its first two products, a 1911 pistol and an AR-15 rifle. Then in 2020, Discovery announced that Monster Garage was returning, premiering on their streaming service in January of 2021. Jesse was back on the network he'd publicly criticized just years before, with a new crew and what he described as a renewed focus on the craft over the celebrity. The Austin Speed Shop chapter sits in his story as the period where he tried to do things entirely on his own terms and learned the hard way that even the best craftsman in the room still needs the right room. The show ended not because Jesse James stopped caring about it. It ended because caring about something, it turns out, has never been the same thing as knowing how to keep it alive. Jesse James had every ingredient that should have made Austin Speed Shop work. The skills, the reputation, the experience, the audience. And yet, the show disappeared so completely that most people watching this video had never even heard of it before today. But here's the thing that's worth sitting with. Jesse never tried to fix it. No relaunch, no reformat, no public explanation. He just walked away. And given everything you now know about how this man operates, the question isn't really why the show failed. The question is whether Jesse James actually wanted it to succeed in the first place, or whether Austin Speed Shop was always more about proving something to himself than building something for everyone else. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because that one's genuinely hard to call. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.